Well, welcome to the OWNIT365 Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping every individual become outward-focused followers of Jesus in every aspect of life. My name is Ben. I am the co-host of this podcast, and I'm sitting across from the man, the myth, the legend, senior pastor of Grace Church, Tim Howey.
Okay, that is so bad. Man, myth, legend. By the way, I saw that on a video one time at our church. It was like man, myth, legend. I walked in. I had a conversation in the lobby. I said, no, we are not putting the myth, the legend. Get that off of there.
Well, I was able to slip it in here then.
That's
there
great.
You go. For all the harassment you give me.
Yes, I do.
Yes, you deserve a little harassment.
I agree.
It's good to see you. It's been a little bit. We last month we had our episode. If you listeners did not get a chance to listen, you ought to check out last month's. It was a conversation with our Romanian church planners, Doug and Camelia Howey, who happens to also be your cousin.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of history there, and it was fun to hear you guys talk about your past together as kids.
Oh, we got pictures of us in the crib, growing up together, locked up. Parents are super happy that we're not out.
Yes. So be sure to go check that out. Now, we also just came off of a campus pastor tour, which means you just came off of the campus hosting tour as well. So talk about that for a minute, if you don't mind, just letting people know why do we do that? Why do we have other campus pastors go to the various campuses?
Yeah, so let me share a couple of things. Number one, God spoke to me a couple of years ago about speaking 50% of the time at Grace Church. And I speak 50% of the time, God spoke to share better. Share more, develop our campus pastors and their younger leaders that are growing. So I speak 50%. The campuses have 50% time as well. So all of our campuses have the majority live, either me there or the campus pastor or somebody else. Yeah. But it's campus life, multi-campus church life is super hard. It's super hard because the longer you go and you kind of forget there's two other campuses or three other campuses in our case. We have an online campus as well. Yeah. And so having a campus pastor tour encompasses two different things. Number one, it helps each of your campuses remember there are two other live campus pastors out there, and you're getting a sense of who they are and their ministry and the different leadership gifting and abilities at Grace. Yeah. And it gives our campus pastors of our in-person campuses a vision of what God's doing elsewhere too. So they see, I see you're doing it quite this way. This is happening. It helps us break down the walls of three separate campuses and really become one church in multiple locations. And so it's been great.
It's awesome. And it's been nice for people, I think, to be able to get a chance to meet you as you're able to visit the other campuses and meet people one-on-one. So
it's so great. Nice. That's probably the best thing. It's so nice for people to meet me.
Well, I think
you just said that.
I did, but it's true. I think sometimes you forget that a lot of folks don't sometimes get a chance to actually have a one-on-one conversation, and they find, oh my goodness, just because someone is up on a stage 5 feet elevated above them or on a screen, in people's minds they're instantly, elevated in a way that they typically shouldn't be.
They find I'm relatively normal.
You are relatively normal, relatively. So, again, welcome to the show. On this episode, I do want to let you know we have something new that we're going to do this weekend, or not this weekend, that we're going to do on this show. We have a new segment that'll be at the conclusion, Grace's Dumbest Moves. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Grace's Dumbest Moves. We have several of them.
Yeah, that's a file I've been collecting over the years, mostly full of dumb things. Really, Tim's dumbest moves over the years, which makes it miraculous that our church is still surviving and has lasted. There are other people who've landed in Grace's dumbest moves as well. Yeah. But I started collecting these funny stories over the years of mistakes I've made to really encourage younger leaders. I just knew someday I'd have younger leaders that I could share these things with, share with our church, and just say, listen, it is okay to make mistakes like above the waterline. Imagine drilling holes in your boat. Mistakes above the waterline don't sink the ship. Yeah. That's okay. And so there are tons of holes. We have Swiss cheese above the waterline on our Grace Church boat. And so it's okay. Make a mistake, laugh about it, fix it, make new mistakes. Always learning, make new mistakes.
Moving forward. Failing forward, as they say, right?
That's right. We'll talk about that at the end. We have one. We'll start sharing a Grace's Dumbest Move session.
So one of the things we're also doing on this episode, we're going to talk about and unpack a teaching that actually coincides along with the Grace's Dumbest Moves because a lot of those dumb moves were related to this particular issue. And we're going to talk about the differences between doctrine, convictions, and preferences. So maybe if you could just start by explaining what that statement means for folks.
Yeah, so this came from as grace was born, we were planted, we were a certain type of culture and belief system and things. And then as God kept changing one thing at a time, the next major thing or minor thing, I'd have these conversations with people, and they'd be very strongly held beliefs. And I found myself trying to discern, okay, what is a doctrine versus conviction versus preference? A doctrine is true for everyone. Jesus is God. That's true for everyone. Pray without ceasing. We should have this constant state of communication with God. That's true for everyone. That's a doctrine. And then there's such a thing as called convictions. Convictions are true for you if God told you to do it or not do it. And so the Holy Spirit of God will lead us uniquely on our path. It's not for everyone, but he might tell me, for me, I must be a part of this. I've got to be part of this ministry, or I can't be a part of that anymore. And that's a conviction, is for me, but the challenge is if I think that's for everyone, if I feel it so strongly, I'm imposing things that are a new law on somebody else that God never intended. And then there's just straight preferences, which is, that's not even what God told me for me. That's not even a doctrine for everybody. It's just, I really, really like it. And probably the largest majority of our feelings are based in preference, are based in, I've always enjoyed this. I like this. I don't like that. So I think everyone should do this. I think the church should make sure it's meeting all my preferential desires. Okay, so
you want Tim Church is what you want.
Yeah. And I always told people, listen, I don't even like everything Grace does. I don't like everything Grace does. And you don't want me to like everything Grace does, because if I ever get to that point, the church is now a cult. Yeah. And I can tell you, I don't have enough control around here to make it a cult. I need to get a lot of more control. Yeah. So no, obviously we don't want that. No. It's not good. But a church should be challenging us and our preferences too.
Yeah. Something I've experienced quite a bit in the particular arena at Grace Church that I'm involved in, which is the worship arts and that kind of thing. I mean, music is built on preference. I mean, it connects with people in certain ways. So, I think one of the downfalls or pits have been for people is applying their preference to doctrine right away. They're just skipping convictions and going straight to doctrines.
Yeah.
A lot of times, and making people feel miserable about things that they enjoy. So can you maybe talk about, as we go through this teaching, talk about Grace Church? Who were we originally? And technically speaking, we weren't Grace Church. We were Grace Baptist Church, which is a part of that story. But maybe describe for us who we were originally.
Yeah, so you had to put in context, I'm a Lutheran who did not know what Lutheran meant when I was 19 years old, though I would call myself a Lutheran, who became a Christian in a Baptist church. And I know what I thought Baptist meant. I thought it meant a bunch of rules and regulations. Don't dance, don't drink, don't laugh, don't smile, those kinds of things. And I'm telling you, I'm not saying it's fair. It was just my religious bias, my stereotype. And so I stepped foot in a church because I chased my girlfriend into church. She had become a Christian, and I found a place of acceptance and love and sharing Jesus and the Bible, and really broke a lot of my stereotypes. But when we were born, I prayed. We birthed a church. God called me to start a church. I prayed for a church name, and I just missed it. I added to the prompting of God. So I was praying and got Grace Church. Grace Church. But I said Grace something church because I saw so many churches had three names. Right. And so God was saying Grace Church, the non-denominational Grace Church we are today. I'm convinced of it. I just missed it. I grabbed a phone book and I started looking about what are the possible middle names that are available. And I really wanted to be Grace Bible Church because actually that was kind of more of a leaning toward non-denominational. Unfortunately, like 10 minutes south of the future home of Grace Church is Grace Bible Church. You can't do that. Not at least
that would confuse
smart.
People.
That would be a Grace dumbest move if I did that. Named as Grace Baptist Church, it wasn't until several years ago that, or a few years later, one of our members pointed out, hey, what if we just change our name and be Grace Church? And I remembered that prayerful answer from the Holy Spirit and this human endeavor of grabbing a phone book and realized I just missed it. So yeah, when we first started, here's how I describe us. We were a suit and tie wearing hymn singing, out of tune piano playing. It's the school's fault. Cringe factor filled. That was my fault. Baptist church. Okay, so that's who we were when we first started. And change after change happened one at a time over the years to take us to, who we are today, like the name.
Yeah. And I will say our family came December of 98. And when we came, we were drawn to it, not by the music, because I was involved in music at the church I was at before, but it was not that. It was just the relationships. And the people were so loving and caring and that kind of thing. So once we submitted our application to apply to be a member of your church, and then once we got the approval after 16 weeks of your
technically
prospective members class.
That is one of Grace's notes moves. Well, the story of how the prospective members class, which started I think at 3 or 4 weeks, got expanded gradually to 13 weeks. Given twice a year. Yeah, that was the dumbest move.
But we can talk about that later. But so it's, all that to say that even in spite of those types of issues, the confusion sometimes between preferences and convictions and doctrines, we were still drawn as a family to grace because of the love and that. So the relationship. So how did we actually start changing? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I didn't start out looking to change things. Mm-hmm. So what happened, and this goes back to how I always question as a young leader, do I have vision? Mm-hmm. Well, actually what I did was I thought, I don't have vision. That's exactly what I thought. I'd hear leaders talk about vision and I'd think, I have no vision. And people would say, what is your 5-year strategic plan? And I'd have a blank. 5 years. I'm thinking the next year. That's as long.
I'm just trying to get to next Sunday, man.
I have no idea, but I would give an answer, And what would happen, how we started changing was, God would reveal the next thing to fix or adjust. It was just the next thing, and so I've always most of my Christian life has been walking with, I'm not sure what's going to happen on step 3 or 4 or 5, but I'm starting to sense that this is step 1 and 2. Do that. And then God, I won't worry about what step 3, 4, or 5 is. And once I get to past step 1 and 2, then God will reveal the next couple of steps. And so it was just change after change after change. And it was the first time this actually started was I was going to teach a series on spiritual gifts. I remember this.
That's pretty bold to do in a old Baptist church too.
It is, but you got to teach on spiritual gifts because people need to know why the sign gifts are done. That's what people need to know. And so that's called the cessationist or the ceasing of gifts. There's a variety of beliefs about spiritual gifts. Yeah. To let people know what spiritual gifts are, by the way, every Christian receives multiple spiritual gifts at the moment of salvation. There's between 17 and 23 spiritual gifts, depending on how you count them. And you'll get a cluster of spiritual gifts, which you'll be really good at, and which means also you won't be good at other things, which is why we need each other. We're a body. Some of us are the ear, the eye, the foot, and ears can't be eyes. They try to see. They can hear really well. Mm-hmm. And so I was going to teach this to our church. And as I studied it, coming from a background where I was taught categorically, there's no such thing as the sign gifts today. They ceased when a completed Bible came. Basing it on 1 Corinthians 13, the end of it. As I studied it, I started to realize I don't think that is true. I don't think that's true. And I don't heard enough stories, by the way. What's funny in my background is we did stories from the mission field of God doing signs and miracles among the Islamic world, the Hindu world. So out of one side of our mouth, we're saying, man, look at the amazing, miraculous visions and dreams and signs God's doing elsewhere. But the sign gifts have stopped. Mm-hmm. And I don't think God uses them in the U.S. like he does elsewhere on the road for certain other reasons. But I taught our church, hey, I don't think it's God's against in the majority world speaking through another language miraculously to wow people about the glory of God so they can receive Christ.
Yeah. And I'm sure that rocked some boats for people.
Yeah, and we even heard anecdotal stories of that happening. Mm-hmm. Not widespread, but anecdotal. If you're going to eliminate for here, you eliminate for everywhere. And so that was the first time I started thinking this thought. I wonder what other areas I need to restudy over the course of time, either to shore up to help us get better, or to really to relook and make sure I can teach more effectively.
Yeah, and as a pastor, you want to seek what you're teaching. You're responsible for shepherding a flock, and if you should be seeking what the Scripture actually says versus what your preferences are. So,
or what you've been taught, what you believe,
yeah, for sure. And so, what was one of the some of the cultural changes that maybe started happening for you? I mean, you had to lead this charge as a senior pastor. You have to, people are watching the senior leadership, and they it does trickle down into the flock, right, to the church. What are some of the things that you started doing differently, or
so they're all based
changes?
Yeah, they're all based. Our culture. We had two cultures when we started. We had a group of people because we came out of a time where a prominent pastor on staff, not the senior pastor, had been fired and fallen into sin and ended up in jail and those kinds of things. So people were in one camp and very much protectionist. Hey, we want to protect and walk with Jesus, make sure we're holding each other accountable, kind of a protectionist mode. And then there was another group of people saying, we need to be open to reach out. There was, are we protecting the past? Are we in a protectionist mode? Are we reaching out in open mode? And my heart was to reach new people. And so we started making cultural changes when I would notice things, I called them earlier cringe factors. When I'd notice things that if I myself wouldn't even want to come to my own church, that's not a good thing. So if I struggled inviting people to my own church, that's not a good thing. And I say that as a guy who became a Christian in Kansas City, went back to school in California, found a church in Redwood City, California, just north of Palo Alto. And I did not want to invite people to my own church. That's my background. Yeah. So I loved my church. I loved the people, but there were so many cringe factors or things I had to explain away. Yeah. I knew I should, like duty, invite people to church. But I didn't want to invite people to church. Yeah. And so what happened was I was starting to unearth things about my own church that I was pastor responsible for. That I'm like, if I was visiting Grace, I wouldn't like this. And so that's kind of started it. One of the things was clothing. And this started changing. I never caused this change. It sort of happened around me. Mm-hmm. I was keeping the faith. I was the last guy keeping the faith. So I was a suit and tie guy every time. I worked at Black & Veatch when it was all suit and ties and dresses. Grace started as a suit and tie and dress kind of a church. Mm-hmm. And we moved to Overland Park.
And keeping in mind, we're in like gymnasiums.
Oh, we're in gymnasiums, doing this, elementary gymnasiums with yellow light made everybody look sick. Jaundice. Yeah. We're all yellow. We're all sick. And so what happened was people started not wearing suits. And I didn't even notice. I just was ministering, pastoring. And it was one day we were finally in the middle school. I looked around. I'll never forget this. We started to realize we could tell who the visitor was because they wore identifying clothing. They wore suits and ties and dresses. That's a visitor. You look at that. Yeah. And I looked around one day and literally we had a couple hundred people and it was me and the visitor was the only guy in a suit and a tie. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I will never forget, talk about preferences. Mm-hmm. Our preference can be powerful. Yeah. I'll never forget the first time I preached, I remember it now, without a tie. And I preached on stage. I still had my suit coat. I still had my button-down shirt. I had no tie. And the entire time I was preaching, I was thinking, my neck is naked. My neck is naked. It's being exposed to people. People are noticing. Oh, I really thought was they're noticing. They're actually in the seats going, do you see? He has no tie. Why does he have no tie? What's going on? What's chaos is breaking out. And so I remember I went out afterwards after service and I said, did you notice? And so he said, notice what? Did you? I have no tie. I asked two of the people and they said, oh yeah, you have no tie. I realized no one else cared. Yeah. No one cared. And then, what's funny is that was a season of being impacted by Hudson Taylor in China. He had Western suits and ties until he changed to Chinese clothing and culture. And then China Intermission blew up and they spread. And so I started to dress in indigenous clothing of my people. I wore the tribal wear of our people. As uncomfortable as it made me, and then I got used to it. Yeah. So
I remember that too. I do remember that. It was interesting just to see the change. You slowly were changing, and
first time I preached with jeans on.
Yeah.
Oh man, I thought people would stare me down.
It's funny.
I kid you not.
It's funny. I think telling younger people, I guess in their who did not have to go through this type of change. It probably might sound silly to them, but man, these are the battles that were fought so you wouldn't have to. The worship wars, the
accent is that?
I don't know. It's the old.
I heard two or three accents there.
It's the we fought this battle 20 years ago so you wouldn't have to.
There we go.
It was a hard fought battle.
It was hard fought battle.
Yeah. It was. So
I even took your meetings. I told people, don't talk. I remember I said,
sure.
Hey, then do not take that meeting.
Which
you send them to me. If they're going to complain about music yet again, you send them to me.
Yeah. So
I will take those meetings.
And that brings us to the next question, which probably, the biggest change with the second highest stakes was the issue you're talking about, which was music, right?
Yes.
Like that was huge. In frame that for folks. And maybe...
So it's even embarrassing me talking about it, but okay. So, but the embarrassing part is my view. Okay. So again, I was a non-Christian for 19 years who became a Christian in a church, and the only Christian music I knew was hymns out of a hymnal. You pick hymn 320, you do somebody holds the first stanza, second stanza. You always skip the third. I'm not sure why you did back in the day, but fourth stanza.
Yeah.
And if you had a really good piano player, you would modulate up. You would go up.
That was the big change.
It was a big change, man. Energy in the room.
Yep.
And you'd have something called a special.
Oh yeah.
Right before you spoke. That was somebody was a soloist, or
we didn't say soloist because soloist was not a good term.
It's
because it indicated
somebody wants attention,
self-glorification on that individual.
Called special
music.
Special.
It was not
so. I'll never forget. I went. I and our pastoral team went to New Philadelphia, Ohio, to a Baptist church there. We wanted to visit a pastoral team and get better, learn from their leadership. And one of the things that changed my life was I'm in church. This is a church who believed all of the beliefs that we were launched with. So they were shared values, shared doctrines, shared convictions, and they had more modern music. Like more contemporary music. And I'll never forget these people I highly respected. They believed in doctrine and teaching and all these things. And they had the name Baptist, and they had this more contemporary music. And it challenged my belief to the core, because I had been taught the only godly music was hymns. The only godly music was written by Fanny Crosby and other people in the 1800s.
Yeah, it had to be 1800s, early 1900s.
I'm not sure what happened, by the way, in the 1700s, 1600s. Not sure what they sang, but we know godly hymns came from the 1800s and 1900s.
Yeah.
And so I remember being back. I took the CD of this music from this band. The band was called Everybody Duck.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I put it in my office and I was listening. And really what I was going through, I believed doctrinally certain things about music. I did. That strong beats or modern sound were sinful for everybody. Because I was taught that. And I never re-examined that. And I found myself in my office with the door closed, playing music and turning it off and going to the Bible and really saying, for me, it was a horrifying thought, have I allowed something that actually is not doctrine, it's just a strongly held preference, because God used it greatly in my life and others, to go beyond just conviction for me, to be a doctrine? Have I led my church? Am I leading my church, teaching people my preferences are doctrines? And it was a horrifying thought, but also a liberating time. And I found myself getting set free myself before even exploring that with and God brought you right at the time. I was re-examining those things, and our pastoral team was re-examining. I brought it to our pastor, and we examined the scriptures, as we always did. I would search things, or others would search things. We'd study it out together, and we'd come to a team decision. And God brought you right at the time, our previous worship leader, who was gifted in more choral music and choir. He was hugely gifted in that.
I couldn't fill his role.
No, and you tried to.
I tried, and I struggled, and he was so good at what he did. It just was not my thing.
And his season at Grace was ending.
Yeah.
At the time, you had come, and we're doing audio ministry, I think.
Yeah.
And
I was a member of the choir.
And you were a member of the choir.
Yep.
And I would sing back then.
Yeah, you did. You were in the choir sometimes.
So I told Grace at the movies. There was days and names. I led music at Grace. Yes. Kathy played the piano. I led music.
I remember.
Yes. But that music was the start of that process for me.
Yeah. That was quite a time. And I would say, having lived through that and being a part of it, I was joking earlier about, I was a veteran of the worship wars of the early 2000s. It was,
It's true though.
yeah, it is. And it's one of those things like you're talking about your struggle and with your preferences. So my preference level was different. Like I could accept different instrumentations, yet I still had certain qualifications that certain songs had to meet that were not, doctrinal per se, right? So there still was, standards set there that were different. So our bars were in different places with regard to that. So, and I remember that. And I think one of the things that I love telling people when we talk about this story is I love sharing how the day that I remember you came to me many years ago, like when we first opened the building, and we had gone through that whole transition of music, and you said, hey, I would rather you with an acoustic guitar than a band full of people that are just up there for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that was a super huge freeing thing for a worship leader to hear that from the senior pastor, because it was like, okay, this means that what matters most is the worship. And it contributes to the factor that preferences don't matter. It doesn't matter if you got a band, it doesn't matter if you have an acoustic guitar, it doesn't matter how that's executed, as long as that the core, the people on that stage are unified and leading worship together and leading the church.
Yeah,
So,
I said, Ben, if we're not giving unity on the praise team, if you're standing up there by yourself, I know we'll have unity on the praise team.
Yep.
And I told you,
Yeah.
I support you, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah. It
We
was
are
all-
going to get to a place of unity.
Yeah.
Because God doesn't bless division. He blesses unity, his people.
Yeah. So that whole change was huge. And I have my own stories that would contribute and enhance some of that story. But you handled that really well as a leader. Like you said earlier, you said, Ben, if anybody has a problem with you send them to me.
So here's some of the things people said about music, and then we'll get to the Romans 14 chapter. But they would say, I'd be in my office in these one-on-one discussions, people who I love, and I've read the books they read. Like I have one particular one, I think it's called Music in the Balance. It's in my office that I bought that was kind of advocating. But I had somebody say, well, rock beats are sinful. And one guy said, rock beats make me think of the bars. So I can't be there. So I didn't do the bar scene. They don't make me think of the bars. So why is that important to me? I don't think of bars. Another guy said, well, rock beats kill plants. Yeah. Then rock music kills plants, and classical music helps plants live. And I said, well, that's great. I said, well, that'd be important if I was ministering to plants. I said, if I was a pastor of plants, I would care deeply about that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I better have the class, but I have people, not plants. And I said, that's not persuasive. Somebody said, well, rock beats make people want to fornicate. And I looked at the guy and I said, waking up makes you want to fornicate. What do you mean rock? You don't need rock beats. What are you talking about? So there's all these conversations we had over the course of time. Somebody said, I don't think we should listen to any music written by living people. They should be dead people. And I said, I agree. I don't think we should hear a message preached from a living person either. I think only dead recordings of dead people too. Like these are all the things we talked about in my office with people I love and respect, and they had strongly held beliefs. And those were the conversations. Lord willing, I was taking it. You didn't have to have, because it wasn't you causing it. Right. It was me as a leader helping lead us that direction. And to be honest, to their credit, we didn't start that way. Yeah. So it felt. It was a change. It was a very high stakes, high emotions change that I always, I felt for them, and I felt with them, because I thought, man, they came out here and they have sacrificed and served with a certain set of assumptions that nothing would ever change, and I get that. And they, to their credit, that's why I would take all those meetings as long as they wanted to talk, because I felt I honored them and owed it to them to really see if they could see it, where God was showing me. Like Romans 14 was one of the passages.
Yeah. You went to, speaking of learning about doctrines, convictions, and preferences, maybe kind of walk through, you had a couple of passages picked out.
Yep. Yeah. This is what I taught. I taught this in our church, and I taught from this passage and from 1 Timothy 3, what is a doctrine? What's a conviction? What's a preference? And then what do we do when someone has a different conviction than us or preference than us? And I think Romans 14 talks about that. So Hey, Ben, we can kind of go back and
Yeah.
forth. Maybe if you read section, I'll read a section.
Okay.
Maybe read the first 4 verses, Romans 14.
Okay. This is New King James. It says in verse 14 or chapter 14, verse 1, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Who are you to judge another's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand.
Right. So Paul is talking about people in the church, at the Church of Rome, and they have 2 different camps. One group says, I think we should be vegetarians. We should all be vegetarians. And that's the path that God has. And then another group says, I am willing to eat anything I can track down that's not human. If I can kill it and cook it, I will eat it. And I'll have my vegetables. And so right out of the gate, Paul points out that one position is actually doctrine and one is not. Because he says there's some people that are weaker in the faith. So there's a weaker in the faith position, a stronger in the faith position. He places the freedom to eat anything as the more strong faith.
Right.
He places the people who believe God says you can only have vegetables as the weaker position. Now, he doesn't say for them they're not being weak, but to think that's for everybody. He says, what do you do about it? Verse 3, if you eat everything, don't despise the person who believes you should be vegetarians.
Yeah.
Or if you don't eat meat, don't be judgmental for the person who eats meat. God's received both of those groups. It's stepping back saying, this is not a doctrine. Thou shalt eat everything is not a doctrine. There's freedom, but not a mandate. So people on either side are told to honor each other, not judge each other. Then he shifts over to days. So I, just to be clear, I'm in the eating everything category. So that's who I am as a person.
Right, sure.
I'll try everything, I think at least once. So then there's another category stuff, one day above another, which I just talked about this past weekend with a family in the lobby at South. Pick up in verse 5 through just 5 and 6.
Okay. One person esteems one day above another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord, and he who does not observe the day to the Lord, he does not observe it.
Okay, let's pause right there.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
I guess, okay, so we finish the sentence.
Yeah. He who eats to the Lord, for he gives God thanks, and he who does not eat to the Lord, he does not eat and gives God thanks.
Yeah. So let's talk about one day above another.
Yeah.
And he says right here, some people celebrate holidays. Holidays are extremely important. Holidays, birthdays, Christmas and Easter. Some days are more important than others, and they esteem that. Others esteem every day alike. Now, to be honest, or candid, I'm an everyday alike guy. Mm-hmm. That's what I am by nature. But he says right here, because I probably come up and say, why don't we do such and such Christian observance holiday, which is not like Christmas and Easter, but another kind of nationally observed thing. Mm-hmm. And I quoted this passage, and I said, there's nothing wrong with making sure churches observe that day. We don't observe that day. And I said, there's nothing wrong with that. Even the phrase, let each be fully convinced in his own mind. That's where the word conviction comes from. Yeah. When you become convinced, one person convinced Sunday is a different day of the week. Mm-hmm. Back in the day in culture in the United States, there was no activities or like sporting events. You rested on Sunday. You worked on Sunday in the Christian world, almost like the Sabbath for Jewish people. Mm-hmm. And today, it's more like the culture is like every day is alike. Yeah. But he says right here, it's okay. Yeah. Let each person be fully convinced in their own mind. Convictions are for you and not for other people, and honor other people. And so then if you jump down a little later on, jump all the way down to verse, I'd say 12 through 15.
Okay. 12 through 15. So then each of us shall give account of himself to God. Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. I know and am convinced by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself, but to him who considers anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Yet if your brother is grieved because of your food, you are no longer walking in love. Do not destroy with your food the one for whom Christ died.
Yeah, so it says, though we treat each other, we're not going to, I'm not going to, if you're a person who really is strongly convinced that having bacon is wrong because the law said bacon is wrong, pigs are unclean, and I'm happy to buy bacon, eat bacon in my house, that kind of thing, and even eat bacon out. But if I'm like having dinner with Ben, I'm not going to serve you a slab of bacon.
Right.
Because he says, hey, don't put a stumbling block in your brother's way. Let them honor their convictions. Honor their convictions. And I taught our church this. Based on this, people would even say, somebody would say, well, my conviction is that this is wrong. Shouldn't you
not eat the bacon?
Shouldn't you not have play this kind of music in our church? Because that's my conviction. I said, no, here's the challenge with the church. Everybody has convictions. If we literally follow every conviction, we would do nothing. We to make sure everybody's conviction is not met.
Yeah,
we're just not going to play music,
right?
Because
just a conflict avoidance.
I said, completely. So what it's talking about is me putting it in your face,
right?
And he does. One of the wildest verses that changed the way I viewed some of these things is down in verse 21.
21. It is good neither to eat meat nor drink wine nor do anything by which your brother stumbles or is offended or is made weak.
Yeah, so my heritage is that drinking is always wrong. And yet Paul puts drinking into a conviction status.
Yeah.
That there's not that drinking is not necessarily drunkenness is wrong, but drinking itself is not, it's a conviction.
Yeah.
Paul himself places it just like bacon is a conviction for people. And you're free to have it, but you're free not to have it if you feel like God. Here's the issue. Doctrine, true for everybody. Conviction. God told you you can't have bacon, or you need to have like the dietary law of the Old Testament. There's nothing wrong with somebody believing God told them that, or you can never have alcohol. Of course, do that. But when you take these convictions about the day of the week or food we eat, and you impose it on other people, it's legalism. You're putting your conviction on somebody else, which is true for you. And if you did it, it'd be totally wrong. But putting it on else, that's also totally wrong. We should honor each other, not judge each other for your convictions.
So how do you handle a situation? Like you just mentioned the example of eating bacon in front of me if I do not like bacon, or I'm convicted about that. I think some people would be like, well, how does that work practically? Should I not eat bacon across the table from somebody, or should that person who doesn't eat bacon have the maturity to understand the scripture and go, that's my personal conviction? Or how do you, is it like a one-off, like just based on, how do you deal with that? Because it's kind of like with the story about the music, right? You don't change the music based on their preferences. How does that go with an individual?
Well, this goes back to following the Holy Spirit to know how to apply that, because God has called you not to put a stumbling block in front of your Christian brother. And so what does that mean? Yeah. Now, for a church, the way the church discerns that is the leadership team, i.e. the spiritual heads, the leadership, the pastors, the elder board, prays and says, here's what we believe to reach our culture and community that God is going to allow us to do or not do. So that's made on a leadership team level. It's not for every individual who shows up, but on a leadership team level. Now you're talking personally. Personally, you can live in freedom. Paul even talks about eating meat offered to idols, but he talks about if you're served food in somebody's house, he gets down to like a personal relationship thing. If you're with somebody in their house or your house, be aware of their cultural convictions and things that might make them stumble in faith, and be aware as a church, the leadership team decides. You as an individual, you decide. And it does not mean, though, that every person's conviction in Christendom controls how you live your life.
Right. Yeah.
It means when you're interacting with somebody, that you honor them and don't try to shove in their face my freedom versus your convictions.
Yeah. It sounds like what that is loving others.
Yes.
Being an outward focused follower of Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, that's great. So you did have another passage as well, 1 Timothy 3.
Yeah, that's just the end of it. You can look at the end of it. It says that the church is the pillar and ground of the truth. And somebody says, well, how do you know what a doctrine is? Your elder board, your pastoral team discerns what doctrine is for that church, what they believe doctrine is, the best way they know how. We do, the best way we know how. So that's how you figure out. Okay, this church believes this doctrine is true because their pastoral team believes the doctrine is true. And if it's not there, it's now a conviction.
Yeah, awesome, man. What a story! Good grief. So many other things in this issue of doctrines, convictions, and preferences that we could even unpack more. But music is just, for whatever reason, that historically throughout the church has always been a very contentious point. So it's awesome to hear that story. And I guess if you were to tell our listeners, like summarizing up in maybe just a statement, like here's why this is important for your life individually.
Yeah, here's why this is important, because for you to follow Jesus, you have to know what each belief you have, which type it is, to help to actually love God and love other people. To know what God says in His Word is true for everyone. To know, as you discern the Holy Spirit speaking to you, what God wants you to do. And to know if it's just something, whether you like it or don't like it. The Bible doesn't say that. You can advocate for it, but to say others are wrong is wrong. It's not loving. It's not discerning. And I would say, by the way, there's anecdotal stories of when hymns began to be written, people would stand up and leave churches because people used to sing the Psalms. So this is not new.
Right.
It just happens again and again.
Yeah. All right, so that brings us. Thank you for sharing that, Tim. That was awesome. So that brings us to the moment people have been waiting for.
Grace's dumbest
moves.
Grace's dumbest moves. They're real dumb.
What is Grace's dumbest moves today? The topic today.
Audio team. So this is early on. We are in the middle school, Blue Valley Middle School, and I, as the pastor, am also the host. So we used to merge pastors and hosts for the room, and I heard as the music was playing, people were singing the highest pitched. I mean, I can't even get that. I was like a dog hearing something odd. I turned my head. I looked around. What? Am I the only one hearing this? And so I'm the only one who would say something about it. So I walked back to our audio team guy, Mike, and I said, Mike, he was the leader of our audio team. Yeah. Mike, can you hear that sound? It's super high. And I kind of did it. And he goes, I'm sorry, Tim. He's great guy, loved God. Sorry, Tim. I'm deaf in the upper registers. I can't hear anything. All the years playing in bands and stuff. And I thought to myself, what have I done? I've got a guy who's deaf in significant registers leading our audio team.
Yeah.
How can that be? He's great in the lower registers. We need someone to be able to hear the highest pitched sounds. So yes.
Yeah.
Grace's dumbest moves. We had a guy that legitimately was deaf in certain registers,
leading our audio
team.
Yeah, and he was faithful,
great
faithful
guy,
servant.
Loved God, served.
Yeah. Led the team. I was a part of his team.
Yeah. He just needs somebody else there to help him hear the high registers. That's what he needed.
And so the reason that's one of our dumbest moves is I think one of the things that we learned throughout that time was that we got to a point in our ministry, a life cycle of our church, that it was time to actually seek out people who could actually execute the roles super well instead of,
well, you always get better.
Yeah.
You always get better.
Absolutely. And step one was they need to be able to hear all registers.
In all the registers. That was a new criteria for our audio team.
And then we moved on to music, and it was they need to be able to sing, which was one of our other dumbest moves that we'll probably unpack at some point, I'm sure.
Sure.
So thank you so much, guys, for listening to this episode of the OWNIT365 podcast. If you have questions or comments, now listen to this because we have something new. You can text the word podcast to 855-734-7223. And we'll get those, and we'll be able to address them. We can address them here as we record. But maybe you can add to our dumbest moves. You may have a dumb move that we're not aware of. We would.
I'm sure the people do. I'm sure. I learn them all the time.
We'll get some hate texting. Yeah, this was a stupid thing you did. Anyway, we would love to hear those as well. So send them in. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, we exist to see everyone become outward-focused followers of Jesus by owning the scriptures in every aspect of our lives. So go out, own it this week. Tim, anything you want to say to the folks?
No, just love you guys.
Love you all. Have a great month.